This is my 1996 Honda Integra Type R, originally imported from Japan. This is one of my all-time favorite cars. I've always been into Hondas, and when I started in the car scene and starting to tinker with vehicles, I started with a Honda CRX. This vehicle itself is the holy grail of Honda vehicles, being the actual Type R. The Honda Integra has always been a coveted vehicle by many. Even though it's front-wheel drive, it did output a significant amount of power. It did rev to 8,800 RPM, and in this case, 9,000 RPM tuned with a Honda. And it's always been sought after by many as one of the most coveted Type R vehicles that you could get. There are the NSX-R, there's the Honda Type R, the Civic Type R, and so forth, but this is still one of the holy grail vehicles, and what I consider a definite JDM legend. While Honda definitely has its own racing history for many years, the Type R has always punched above its weight. For an equivalent in power at the time, you would be needing 3 times the engine to make the displacement of the Type R. For horsepower per liter, the Type R, let alone a lot of Civic engines, ended up making over 100 horsepower per liter. So you're looking, in this particular case, 210 out of a 1.8 liter, which is absolutely insane. The equivalent would be in a Fox body Mustang or an SN95, something that needed 5.2, 5.7 liter to make the same or similar amount of power. So your Camaros and Firebirds and Mustangs at the time were only making 35, maybe 40 some odd horsepower per liter. So what the Type R made, let alone the absolutely intoxicating sound it makes at 9,000 RPM, it needed 3 times the engine to make the power of this front-wheel drive 4-cylinder Honda. When I bought this specific Type R, it was just a rolling shell that my brother had owned, so it didn't have much more than coilovers, some springs, very little in the interior. It didn't have the seats, didn't have an engine, transmission, wiring, ECU, nothing. So I literally started with a bare bones shell that I wanted to build and make my own. Initially, I was thinking about putting an H22 into it. Past that, maybe a GSR, built head, ITBs, and so forth. But at the end of the day, I didn't want to ruin what I considered an absolutely amazing vehicle in its stock form. So there are things that you could argue, like the purity behind the vehicle and so forth. But for this, I wanted the Type R engine, so the B18C, and I wanted it to be as clean and as true to its heritage as physically possible. On my birthday of all days, I decided to throw a bunch of money onto my Visa, and I did end up finding a B18C at a local JDM tuner shop. Now, not only was it B18C, so the exact engine that would have come in this vehicle, it was a 2000 spec. So on top of all else, it had the machine port heads, it had the B16B cams, so it was essentially a built cylinder head from factory. So it made more power, a bit higher compression, and the transmission itself was an N3E short ratio LSD transmission. Now, my understanding from years of research, now my research is dated at this point, it was a helical style LSD, and it does provide a pretty nuts, or a pretty insane, you could say, amount of grip when I was autocrossing this on Hoosier slicks. Anyways, it was slicks. So when I was racing on slicks, it was an absolute game changer. The end goal for this, other than keeping it stock and true to its heritage, or true to the heritage, I wanted a nice daily driver kind of autocross toy. So the end result ended up being something that you could daily to and from work, you could drive on the weekends, but at the same token, you can throw a set of slicks on it and take it to your local autocross event or your local road course event and have an absolute hell of a time. For modifications, I wanted to keep it relatively simple. It did come, fortunately, with the VIS carbon hood, But for power performance modifications, I ended up doing a J-style cold air intake, or I guess you would call it a short ram, whatever it ends up being. It did end up providing quite the intoxicating induction noise, if I do say so myself. Beyond that, it did come with the factory 4.1 race header, which is a huge bonus on the 98 and up factory B18C engines. Other than the two that were mentioned, it does have a spoon catback exhaust, which is pretty tame, but being that the Type R has zero interior sound deadening, it does tend to be a bit of a nuisance on the highway. I mean, it's par for the course, right? You'll be cruising at 120 kilometers an hour and it's singing right around 4,500 RPM. The suspension, it does have Tane, I believe, HA coilovers. They do end up having the helper springs and they are 24-way adjustable, which did end up helping dial it in when I was autocrossing the car. For brakes, it has StopTech cryo-treated full-face discs. It does retain the factory DC2 calipers, and I did put Hawk HP Plus pads into them. So when I did use my track wheels that were white, I would typically go home at the end of the day and they would be a dark graphite. So they got dusted pretty good. Currently it's sitting on a set of 6-spoke OG style JDM wheels. For the exterior, we did end up using a Mugen style, I believe it's a version 2 rear wing. Now it is a replica because the original would have cost me an arm, leg, and probably some other organs. So I did wrap the center carbon. It did end up looking pretty good. And for the interior, just your basic strut bars that the factory Type R did not come with. It did come with the factory front upper strut bar. It is a factory piece. It is a Type R piece. It did come with the rear lower, but I did also add the rear in the trunk. So it was an option, but this one here, I did end up finding a secondhand one out of a Type R, painted it, threw it in the back, and it does have a C-pillar bar that I did end up putting up in front of or atop of the rear seats. Now the last thing left for the interior, it does have a Momo steering wheel. It does have the factory titanium 5-speed Type R shift knob. It does have Takata seats in that vibrant green that is very iconic and very period specific or period correct. And it does have a harness bar. Now the harness bar is just a universal NRG bar that I got to make work and got to fit with the harnesses. But beyond all that was mentioned, that's pretty well it. Sway bar stayed the same. Everything else stayed the same. For the rear taillights, I guess if it's worth noting, we did end up going with full reds, so 98 and up spec taillights. A couple things of note in the engine bay that I may have missed is that it does have upgraded poly engine mounts from Yonaka, and for the torque mounts, I did initially go with a solid mount. That was too buzzy, you could say. Felt like my fillings were about to rattle out of my teeth. So I did end up going to a urethane style. That wasn't good enough. So all I did is I ended up going with factory mount, and I did fill them with window weld or polyurethane. So after they cured, they were installed, and it was the happy medium. So they're about a 60A if you were getting specific and nerdy with the durometer rating. I had a really good time with this car. Unfortunately, it did end up sitting for 4 years, and life just got in the way between life, other projects, and so forth. So it's made it pretty tough. I mean, I've had a lot of good memories with this vehicle between multiple autocross events and building it from essentially a rolling shell to where somebody would likely just scrap the vehicle to the vehicle you see now. It is an end of an era because Honda doesn't make cars like this anymore. And I think the last one they made was in 2001. It's a very special vehicle and it's very special to me. I have a lot of very good memories racing it, and I do plan on returning it back to stock and listing it for sale for somebody else to enjoy. Out of all the Hondas I've owned, this one is definitely iconic and doesn't really compare to the rest. These are one of the ones that everyone had sought after and everyone wanted to own at one point or another. And I still think if you get the opportunity to drive one of these classic Hondas, definitely take the time to drive one and actually see what makes it so special. As much as I've loved owning the Type R, it's time to let it go. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. See you guys in the next one.